Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about La La Land. La La Land is a great sweeping Hollywood musical in the tradition of classic Hollywood musicals of yesteryear. The kind of musical that you can get all up into and just be majestically swept away by how infectious and wonderful it really is until you start to think about it. And it's kind of an interesting experience while watching it. At first I wasn't really into it, then I got really into it, and then I started thinking about it afterwards and reading about it and not feeling as magical about it, because it's not really doing anything with the musical. It's not really saying particularly anything that musicals haven't said like a million times before. If you're going to put this up against anything by Vincent Minnelli or Stanley Donen or any big classic Hollywood musical or Bubsley Berkeley, for example, this film just really does not stand up to that whatsoever. And you could say that's really unfair, but just simply what is it exactly doing with all this, other than making a very charming, nicely made love story that doesn't really say much of anything and is sort of empty in what it's doing. Now, it's kind of wonderful at doing that, certainly, and I think that's one of La La Land's greatest strengths, is how it's made, how colorful it can be, how it's filmed in CinemaScope. But unlike how, Tarantino, when he films in certain things, he's trying to say something or harken back to a past era of Hollywood and kind of actually make it like that past era of Hollywood and have a real reason to show a set and things like that. This is kind of doing it because someone else did it a long time before. And it's especially odd when you have musicals like Hamilton or have TV shows like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend who are trying to do something with a musical and trying to say something different with the musical and push that medium forward. And then you have something like La La Land that is recapturing it and that's all. Really, I think that's kind of what makes La La Land a really thrilling, amazing experience, but it doesn't really make it a thrilling, amazing movie that holds up to thinking afterwards. It's the kind of empty experience that people think musicals are, but then if you know more about musicals and what goes on with them and watch a great musical like The Bandwagon or particularly Singing in the Rain, which both this and The Artist, being classic Hollywood kind of awards movies, like to try to do things that Singing in the Rain kind of already has done and not really do it as successfully at all, and then you're kind of left with this movie that's harkening back to this classic Hollywood thing that we will eventually sort of forget about but had a really great experience with at the time. And I think La La Land, while being a lot better, I think, than The Artist and a lot better made, it doesn't really say much more than having a really great, fun, vibrant experience and making you wish the musicals were back again. But it makes me realize the musicals are back again and are saying a lot more than La La Land is saying, and bring up your heart on the sleeve, classically wonderful musical, not really understanding why it's exactly doing it other than to kind of sweep you in its magical musicalness of it all, and hopefully not really think about it, at least until you leave and then start to think about it. The couple in LA, Mia, played by Emma Stone, who is a on-studio barista at Warner Brothers, and then Sebastian, who is a jazz pianist, played by Ryan Gosling. They meet by happenstance on the freeway, but then meet later at a bar when she hears him playing as she walks by. They start a romance after meeting each other again, as she is an aspiring model and he is an aspiring jazz pianist, and he starts to play piano in an up-and-coming band that's getting bigger and bigger and starts to tour, and she starts to do a one-woman show to get more auditions and get further in her acting career as their romance blossoms and their careers go in very different directions. The kind of ideas in this and how it romanticizes creativity and dating someone who's creative, I guess, and being a dreamer and wanting to have his goal in life and everything like that isn't very realistic kind of at all. Ryan Gosling's character is a jazz piano player, but doesn't really talk about many jazz piano players and doesn't even really talk about the kind of jazz that he likes to play, which, by the way, if you are into jazz or play jazz, you would talk about oh, I like this form of jazz, or I really like Art Tatum, who they don't bring up, or something. I think he brings up one jazz piano player, which is kind of a little weird for someone who's really into jazz. And even with Emma Stone's character, the way she brings up Paris kind of feels like a 12-year-old girl's version of Hollywood and acting, and doesn't feel real in that sense. And I understand it's a musical and it's not trying to feel real, but part of this musical is trying to feel real. There's this this whole idea of having these broad, sweeping songs and like being able to see everyone dance, and you know, not necessarily they're the greatest dancers, but being able to dance and sing, and having it shot well where you can actually see the person's body in the full frame, which gives it kind of a more magnetic quality, which most modern musicals unfortunately try to cut around, and it really messes up the dancing. This actually does show that, which gives it more of a performance quality, which I do quite like about La La Land, but it plays it in such a romantic way. It kind of feels like you're with that girl who has that Eiffel Tower lamp in her bedroom or something and talks about how wonderful Paris is, and you're like, have you been to Paris? And I go, no, but I have this Eiffel Tower lamp. What are you talking about? It screams of that, but it's sort of wonderful in that also, but then I kind of also think it's sort of empty. It's a weird experience with La La Land because part of it is like, should I just review it on how I felt right after I got out of the theater, which is like, wow, this is like such a magnetic kind of a thing, but then I started thinking about things like, you know, a show I really like is like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I've seen like every episode. I really love that show. And what that does with musical, and does kind of a similar thing of bringing the musical to the modern world and doing something with it, but it's saying something about those characters. I know all those characters very well. I know their tics, I know their quirks, and they're saying things about mental illness and all that. And La La Land is about these two people in love, and they're creative, apparently. And then when you look at like things that are happening on Broadway, like with Hamilton, which is a huge hit and is about Alexander Hamilton and uses rap music and uses all these different references in it, and same with Book of Mormon. Well, the musical's not really dead, it's just this particular kind of musical, and like, what are you saying with it? I mean, most of these CinemaScope musicals, if you're trying to go back to something, are you talking about The Bandwagon? Are you talking about various musicals I haven't seen and probably won't reference because I can't reference them fully? Or are you talking about Singing in the Rain or something like that? And what are you saying with it? I think the difference between what Tarantino did last year with the 70mm thing is he is in fact referencing films shot in 70mm and doing something with that concept and with that idea and with people hating each other and the whole idea of hate, and you know, John Carpenter's The Thing, and see, I'm talking about influences and how he used them. And La La Land doesn't seem to know what it's doing with those references. It's one thing to be postmodern, which, like, you know, we're in a postmodern society, so like pretty much everyone does it, but you have to actually know what you're doing with your postmodern ideas. And La La Land doesn't, and that makes it sort of kind of a bit emptier and kitschy. I particularly felt that way at the opening number, which heard from many people and happened to, when I saw it, where everyone cheered after that sequence was on. That's a fun sequence, but it kind of plays like a Pepsi commercial that's done in one take, and you're just like, that's cool, that's impressive, that's cool that you did that, but like, what are you saying with it? It kind of just sets up that you're in LA, but what's the real purpose of that song, to be honest? And I think each song usually in this is trying to say more things about character, and it kind of feels oddly out of place. It's very showy and being like, look what I can do. And a lot of this film is done in these kind of longer take type of things, although they do these things where, like, if you do see a long take or a long tracking shot and suddenly you see a shot of a wall or something, or a shot of a door or a shot of the sky, it's usually so they can do a cut and combine various longer takes. It's still impressive. I don't think it's not impressive, but they did that like a lot in this movie. I think with the movement of the camera, it actually sort of works. Particularly that early sequence, I was just kind of like, okay, I mean, I'm not sure what you're doing here other than showing off how impressive that is. And I think Damien Chazelle, you know, he's an interesting director in that after Whiplash, which was Oscar nominated and he got tons of attention, and he even wrote 10 Cloverfield Lane, could have probably gone off and made a superhero movie if he wanted to. In fact, most people who make a indie movie that does really well, that's what they end up doing. And he ends up kind of doing the thing that like Paul Thomas Anderson or an Alexander Payne would do back when indie film kind of sort of meant something to more people than no one, which I guess is now, and went and made his kind of auteurish vision kind of a movie. I respect him for that, but I think take like, for example, like Martin Scorsese's New York, New York, which was really beautiful and gorgeous and is a musical that, you know, I saw this at the Alamo Drafthouse and they showed clips of New York, New York, and I was like, man, that is such a just a gorgeous, wonderful movie, and kind of a riff on A Star is Born. It's kind of interesting in a lot of ways and just such a gorgeous movie. La La Land tries to do something like that. It almost feels like watching Damien Chazelle's like copying Scorsese, who's copying Vincent Minnelli, but he doesn't really understand what either are doing. He's doing them on the surface, kind of romanticized way. I could see a La La Land poster being on someone's bedroom next to like Audrey Hepburn or something. I guess maybe I'm just like chastising it because of the kind of thing it is. I still think getting swept up in it is a fun experience. experience, and it's a really wonderful experience when you get swept up in it. But I would recommend, if you really like this movie, to maybe see something Vincent Minnelli had made, or see, like The Bandwagon or Singing in the Rain if you haven't seen those, because that's a substantial and amazing musical, and it shows you what musicals can do. And this very much references things with his camera work, from Buzzley Berkeley to Gene Kelly to Vincent Minnelli to all those things, and does them all quite well, and in a way that I think something like The Artist did it kind of blandly silent film. It's like just blandly anything. It's just silent movies, and you can't really tell if it's doing Murnau or Chaplin or Keaton or anyone really. It's just kind of just silent film, making it kind of a really empty experience. I think La La Land isn't as empty. It's actually big studio musical directors in certain places, and it does it like amazingly well, better than I've seen anyone really do it. And I do actually like that no one has to be in a fantasy world or some conceit going on within it, but La La Land is just kind of a really wonderful kind of empty champagne type of movie, I guess. And although it is probably the best Ryan Gosling Emma Stone movie, although the competition being Crazy Stupid Love and Gangster Squad doesn't really say that much, but I think it's a fine, nice, wonderful type of a thing. But it also kind of does these things where any movie it references isn't just some simple movie. It's like some of the biggest movies ever, like Casablanca or Rebel Without a Cause plays a major part in this movie. It plays in that kind of broad classic Hollywood way. In some ways can rub you the wrong way. I think a lot of cinephiles might have a bigger problem with this than I have, but I've noticed a lot of people have just kind of gotten swept up in it, and I can understand being swept up in it, because there's a lot to be swept up with, because it's just so magical in certain places, and it's so magical to see some of this on the big screen, particularly if you get great digital projection and how they use like bright, colorful clothing, kind of harkening back to kind of more technicolor, kind of beautiful CinemaScope type of movies. And the cinematographer by Linus Sandgreen, I think, does all that very well. I can't really remember a lot of the songs from it. I remember some of them, like sorta a little bit. I don't really want the soundtrack to La La Land, and I don't think the songs, there was no like funny joke in the songs that really stuck out to me. There was no interesting take on any of the songs that stuck out to me, which is kind of funny since most of the modern musicals that I really like sort of exactly did all that. The music in Moana is better than La La Land. I can sing You're Welcome, and it's been a few weeks. La La Land I saw like tonight, and I just don't remember it all that well. The characters are too broad. I think this film gets away with a lot with its two very charismatic leads, especially like I don't really love Ryan Gosling as much as some people. I don't know if Emma Stone, like, it's kind of sort of being ironic, but I don't know what it's really doing with that irony. But I think the leads kind of make up for a lot of what this movie necessarily isn't giving you, but it kind of helps it work. There's a lot of things that make it work better than it probably should. Some of that is just, how it's shot, to just being kind of the unique thing of being the kind of musical that it is. You're just kind of like, oh cool, this exists again. That's wonderful. One of the things that's interesting, I kept thinking of a part in it where John Legend talks about jazz, and they're talking about how the people who made jazz what it was were kind of people who were evolving, and jazz was about evolving. They were revolutionaries. And it's kind of interesting to look at a film like La La Land, bring that up, because I don't think La La Land is any of those things. I don't think it's evolving the musical. It's not doing what like so many other musicals that have been big and have permeated the culture and haven't been live action movies have, and what they have is like done something with the musical no one thought they could do. And I think with like a TV show like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, like a musical like Hamilton, like a slew of Disney movies, La La Land just sort of doesn't do that in any sort of a way. It's not evolving the musical. It just feels like a musical that would have been a big star vehicle in the 40s or 50s, but it wouldn't have been one had it come out at that time that would have meant what it does today. In the grand scheme of musicals, I don't think this will stand the test of time. I think it's a film that can never really evolve past what it is, which was just a really fun experience at the movies. Just because it's a musical and not maybe like a superhero movie, I guess we're going to treat it a lot better. And because it's more of an auteur movie, and that sounds a lot nicer, and it's probably a lot more better as a conversation piece at a dinner party. But in terms of La La Land and in terms of movies, I think it's a wonderful experience that never really gets too deep and really does anything new with the musical, and you're just sitting there and having a wonderful time. But then when you leave, you'll end up thinking about all its flaws and how better musicals really can be. And maybe if it can get you more into better musicals and thinking about musicals and why they work and everything like that, that's a nice thing about La La Land. And I think I'll probably see a few better musicals because of this movie. But as for the movie itself, I think it pushes these romantic notions within it. It just doesn't doesn't really know what to do with them other than to just sweep you off with them and give you a good time. And that's a fine enough, wonderful experience of a movie, but you're not going to get anything more than that from La La Land. So if you've seen La La Land and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.